Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first edition of Next Audio Europe, where the discussion will be focused on the digital transformation of radio and audio industry in Europe. So we would like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers and attendees in making the virtual conference possible, and also a big thank you to our sponsors, Xperi and Targetspot. Let's take a look at today's agenda before we present our first panel. So bear with me, I'll just share my screen. So the first panel today will be just after my short introduction on the new podcast revolution, followed by an exciting discussion on the transformation of the digital in-car audio landscape. Just before lunch, we will have a short exciting conversation with Active Radio Group and EBU. After the lunch, we will have a panel on the in-car audio, and followed by the innovation strategies of public and private radio in Europe. And then we will conclude the day on the telecom and mobile operators' opportunity in digital audio streaming. So, just stop I have now the pleasure to introduce our first speakers for today. So I have with us Cheryl Brumley from the Financial Times, Adam Pattison from Targetspot. Also with us is Cathinka Rondan from NRK. And finally, Joël Ronez from Binge Audio. So this exciting session will be moderated by Monique van Dusseldorp. Monique, the screen is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. It is an exciting session. I mean, I don't know how it is for the rest of you, but I think the last 15 months has been a completely audio-dominated media landscape, because everybody was taking these really long walks outside to just get away from the home. And what did they do? They listened to podcasts. So it's been an exploding marketplace. But at the same time, how healthy is this marketplace? What is happening? What are the business models? What are the new formats? This is the topic of our first session today. And we have an excellent panel here, already introduced. But let's just first get to know them a little bit to know what they are doing. And, you know, we only have 45 minutes. So we're going to tackle 3 topics mainly. But first of all, Adam, tell us a little bit about Targetspot. What do you do?
Yeah, thanks, Monique. My name's Adam, and I look after the Targetspot UK business specifically. Targetspot's a technology business with specialisms across the audio landscape, really, but particular focus on advertising monetization, helping publishers increase their revenues through ads, and helping deliver really targeted, meaningful audiences for brands as well.
And just really briefly, I mean, we see popularity of audio content across platforms. But that doesn't really get matched yet with a advertising volume you would expect, right? I mean, the minutes that we listen are not matched by what is happening. What's the most important development happening in the landscape when it comes to advertising and podcasts?
Yeah, I think, well, you opened things up by saying, you know, we saw a boom in audio when the pandemic hit, but that wasn't inevitable, right? At the start, actually, the biggest beneficiary of the pandemic was video on demand, it was television on demand, it was TV on demand, and podcasting actually hit when people were looking for an alternative a month or 2 in, particularly when people were locked in their homes and not commuting anymore. And one of the things that we've seen is that it was only really in the last 12 months, certainly in the UK, that we saw the real growth in podcast revenues. So in the UK, we saw pretty good growth in terms of user base. It's about 17 million at the moment in the UK, and forecast to be 24 million unique users by 2024. But we saw 43% revenue growth in the UK over the last 12 months. They were the last IAB reported numbers in 2020.
Oh, very nice. Well, we'll come back to the ways these advertisers are spending money on podcasts in a minute. Let's first meet the other people that we have here. Let's first go to TV. Cathinka, head of radio at NRK. I mean, you are in charge of all the radio over there and also the podcast. Tell us a little bit what you are doing at NRK and what happened in the last year.
Well, NRK is a public service media, and we have 13 radio channels and a wide range of podcasts. And the last year, it's been, as you've been talking about, more people are listening to podcasts, and more people, they're listening more to radio. So just the sound in general is very popular.
Yeah.
So it's been meeting also the new groups of listeners that we see that in Norway we had very much that it was mostly comedy and entertainment that was on the top list of podcasts, but now it's much more news and documentaries and a much wider range.
So is it fair to say that it's actually going a little bit more mainstream in comparison to what it was before?
Yes.
Yeah. And have you developed any completely new and interesting and different podcast formats that the rest of Europe should know about because they're so popular in your area? We're here to spy on the best practices.
Yeah, of course. But what's interesting, it's also interesting to see that we have what we refer to as double hits. So two of the most popular podcasts we have started as radio shows. But at the same time, we see very much that the listener seeks radio for one thing and podcast for another thing. But yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that as well because the format is really interesting. What's going on there, and things are changing a little bit. Joël from France, Binge Audio, one of the biggest podcast producers over there, and I know your biggest hits are not necessarily mainstream hits, right? Could you tell us a little bit more about what you are developing and doing in France?
Yeah, as you said, the main podcast we have, to give you an example, has a name in France, which is Les couilles sur la table, which means balls on the table. I'm sorry for that language. And it's a podcast about, it's a feminist podcast about men in society. So our first stage, when we launched it, we thought it was like a niche program for the feminist listeners, very engaged. And on the contrary, it's a very universal show, which we receive a lot of mails and reaction from all kind of population all around the world. So we have on our offer, we have 4 kind of podcasts. We have this kind of society podcast, but with strong new political debates like racial issues, LGBT issues, men and women.
Very personal issues mostly, right?
Yeah. It's, as we said, it's political and intimate, both. Yeah. But it's universal topics. And after we have also news and society content with investigation and a daily podcast show, and also entertainment and narrative content, like stories. Yeah. So altogether, it's around 10 regular podcasts.
And are you the publisher of those podcasts, or do you also do a lot of podcast production on demand for other organizations?
We have a model which is based on, we are a publisher, so it's like a media. We are at 18 person. We have journalists, and we are a production company also. So we produce for ourselves, for our content, and we have a media economic model with advertising and also subscription. And also we are a producer, so we produce for brands, brand content, white label, and also for platforms such as Spotify, Deezer, Sybil, and other kind of platforms.
So they see, oh gosh, you have a really popular show like this. Let's order a show there because maybe it will be popular as well. Yeah.
Actually, the ecosystem of the distribution is getting more and more complex. And since you have now Amazon Music in France since a few weeks, you have also Apple, who have launched subscription model just this week. You have Facebook, who are going to launch it next week, and you have there's somebody missing, I don't remember. Spotify also. Obviously.
Yeah. Now everybody wants to be in this game, right?
And they want to have exclusive content, in order for the people to take subscription on their platform. So actually, the model is getting complex, and
And you have to choose where to be. Let's revisit it as well, because I know our last and final speaker introduction, Cheryl at the Financial Times, your global head of audio, you also get approached by all these platforms that want to have exclusive content, right? I mean, and you're also a publisher. So we have a broadcaster, we have a service provider in Targetspot, we have a publisher of podcasts specifically with Binge Audio, and we have Financial Times. What do you do at the Financial Times that podcasts are now so important?
Yeah, so I oversee the FT, as you said, the FT's sort of audio content and sort of monetization strategies. And really, we're a sort of small team out of London and New York. We kind of transform the very best of our journalism into podcast. And that sort of, meets a lot of the Financial Times goals of sort of growing our subscriber base and growing that reach and awareness around our brand. And really, we just want to bring really good journalism into the audio world. But there are challenges because, when you sort of work in a newsroom and a different medium to whatever everybody else is sort of working on, podcasts weren't native and audio journalism wasn't native to what the Financial Times did. So, me as the first sort of global head of audio, I've sort of come in and developed this sort of strategy around our podcast, but also, we're sort of educating the newsroom as well about what is possible in this space, which is quite a lot. So it's a very exciting time for us.
And what kind, because I mean, some of the most popular podcasts, I mean, there's one I listen to here in the Netherlands. It's just two friends talking to each other every week about, an area of life that I'm interested in. But the FT kind of podcast, that's like editorially investigative, there's background, there's proper sound production. You take the high road, right? I mean, this is very...
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, we do have conversational, but very smart conversations with some of kind of our really well-known sort of superstar columnists with, newsmakers. We also have a daily, and then you sort of hinted at something that we're very sort of excited about and trying to kind of develop a strategy around, which is sort of these big sort of investigative series. We at the FT have these really exciting investigations, sort of follow the money type of things, and we want to bring that to the sort of narrative space in the audio market.
Okay, so very ambitious projects, and also a little bit, and then I'll move it back to the rest of the panel. I mean, I first want to talk about the audiences that you reach. And for the FT, I know you are very much also reaching an American audience, right? Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so like I said, what we do here in audio and the audience that we want to reach sort of chimes with the sort of wider FT strategy about growing our subscriber base. And so we're really looking to the States to do that, both in print, but also the American market is the biggest one for podcasting. So we're really sort of US facing, but we don't just do exclusively US facing stuff. We have two UK facing, sort of European facing podcasts as well. But for us, the kind of biggest growth market is the US.
Yeah. And as somebody commented, I mean, language, I mean, any language video can travel to completely unexpected territories, and English language video can travel the whole world, it seems. But that's different for podcast. I mean, if it's just listening, people choose their own language much more than, you have the Dutch that will listen to English and some Germans maybe as well. But on the whole, they will listen to their own language, right? Are you intending to also launch in different languages as the FT?
I mean, I think it's something for the future because we are a small team. And so I think it's something that we'd be interested in the future. But our journalism is in English, and they're just
that's the focus.
That sort of added production element to do that. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah. I was wondering, but this is more like if the product in its own language cannot be easily exported, we've seen this with some, I mean, the Dutch have seen this with some TV shows, then the format often can be exported. So, you know, there will be format markets for podcasts as well, maybe, that where you think like, okay, you know, take the format, run with it, do it in your own language. Joël, you develop a lot of new formats. I mean, are you also actively developing a new audience for your podcast? Do you just throw them out there and see what happens, or are you really going after specific audiences? It's all in French, so it's definitely a French-speaking audience, but do you find French-speaking people all over the world, or do you have new groups that previously were not part of the podcast audience that you are getting in? What is happening in the audience development at your end?
It's true that as the French is a spoken language around the world, something like the 5th or the 7th, I don't know, we have an audiences abroad, like in Asia, Africa, but mostly US, UK, you know, places where there's a lot of French speaker and French expatriates. But the advertising market is local. So we do like 85% of the listening in the country, in France. And this is the kind of audience we can monetize, you know, because, you know, the advertiser is interested in advertising in a country, in an area, and not specifically in Chile or Mexico.
Yeah,
but
the advertise market is local as well, so it's actually not a problem that your market is local. Yeah,
it's good for our influence, and it's good, you know, for the brand, for Binge Audio, to be listened everywhere. We are on a worldwide market, but I mean, it's like the music, you know, the audio content is 80% local. And in France, as it is a big country, the people, you know, are not used to listen in other languages very easily.
No, there's enough. You have enough to listen to.
It's like Germany, or the people like to listen in their language, and also there's cultural scheme, and so our content is adapted to the French audience. We are not competitive for outside audience. Some of the investigation we do could be done on English, for example, as for international version. Mm-hmm. We did that a few times. For example, we did an investigation about Black Panthers in US, Algeria, France. So we did in French and English with a platform. It's possible sometimes, as it is, you know, in the documentary market for cinema or for TV, but it's actually a small audience. Most of the audience and the business we do is local.
Yeah, I understand. And I guess, Cathinka, that's the same for NRK, right? I mean, your remit as a public broadcaster is to produce for a, you know, local Norwegian audience, not for international markets.
We're financed over actually the taxes, so our job is to make content for the Norwegian listener. And about 30% of the Norwegians say they listen to mostly then English speaking content. But our job is to make Norwegian content. But we very much see that this is as it became with streaming on television as well. It is a much more global competition, even though our content is in Norwegian and will always be, where of course some of the listening also goes to the English speaking podcasts.
Do you think there will be global competitors trying to go for the Norwegian speaking podcast market? Will Spotify launch its own Norwegian daily news update? Or, I mean, is there competition going on from other parties than local parties?
Yeah, we've been waiting for it actually and prepared for it, because they...
Ooh, I lost you there for a sec.
Spotify hasn't yet in that way. We've been waiting for it, to be honest, because Spotify has done that in Sweden, but they haven't yet discovered Norway, or they haven't tried.
Yeah, or the Netherlands, very small markets.
Yeah, yeah.
They will come, though. They will come.
Yeah. But we have a heightened competition in the newspapers in Norway have just recently, a couple of months ago, paid well to buy some of our biggest profiles.
So your stars are being picked up by other media companies in the same countries. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. So we can, but also what you can see in podcasting and much of the content, like Financial Time makes as well. The producer is very important, and the storytelling is very important. And right now in Norway, the number one podcast is a documentary podcast that we make.
Fascinating. And what kind of documentary?
It's called The Whole Story. So it's NRK's podcast, and you have a series we had the series now with the 22nd of July, which was a tragic story in Norway, and has a 10-year. It's 10 years ago this year, and we've had. So it's like the whole story of a national event or something that happened.
That was the mass killing of the teenagers, right? Yeah.
And also, and the latest was the story of Quisling, who betrayed Norway during the war. So it's and it's the contract with the listener is the whole story.
But I think that's fascinating that you can do something with podcasts that can become truly really popular that you couldn't do in radio or TV. I mean, it wouldn't work the same way.
It wouldn't really. And I also talked with someone about how it was like, just because it's difficult to make radio documentaries work, because you very seldom have a radio listener from second one. So we felt very lucky that the podcast became so popular just before you started giving up the radio documentary. But what you've done in a way is, it's been a couple of years where you haven't focused enough on the radio producer. So we see one thing is that there's like a bidding contest for the profiles, but the same is actually also for the good producer. There's a lack of good storytelling producers as well.
So they will come after you as well pretty soon then. No, but it's true. It's like a golden age for a certain part of the industry, because everybody's now battling it out and thinking, okay, I should get the biggest talent and the biggest shows in right now connected to my platform. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. And maybe Adam, you can comment on that as well. I mean, we now see that the big platforms try to find competing content and therefore are interested in, good podcast content, but they're also changing their models all the time, right? I mean, there's what Apple is doing now, or Netflix or Spotify, the model is going to subscription, for instance, or hosting it on the platform, taking away the direct access to the listeners, but adding a lot of listeners. There's quite a lot of decisions by podcast publishers to make about, am I going it alone, or by broadcast, do I do my own app, or my special service, or are going to distribute it to anywhere and then see what happens? Adam, what do you see happening in that space? Because you have a bit of an overview, since you have clients in many different regions.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that initially the move to, or the attempted move to, a subscription model by podcast specialist platforms came in a few years ago. And I don't necessarily think that the uptick was probably enough to justify it alone. And even when you look at businesses like Spotify, right, spending hundreds of millions on unique podcasting content, that isn't so people will pay for it in an on-demand perspective, right? They're not going to pay for individual podcasts. It's just to differentiate enough so Spotify can continue to sell their premium service to more and more people. Because if we're completely honest about this, there's a real duplication issue with podcasting. Most of the podcasts are available on all of the platforms. So there's no real differentiator other than personal preference of technology platform. So I think that the model that we'll rest on and go forward will definitely be a hybrid model. It is part subscription. For example, Amazon buying Wondery, I think it was. That isn't so they can sell exclusive Wondery podcasts on a per episode basis. It's to enrich the overall Amazon offering,
and wipe out the competition as well everywhere, right? I mean,
and push more people.
I'm sure Binge Audio will be acquired sometime soon, Joël. If you go on like this and have the most popular podcast, they will make you an offer, right? Is that already happening?
We have on our we are a young company. We have 5 years old, and we have a shareholder, which is a little bit around the third, which is the equivalent of Financial Times in France, which is Les Echos. So who have invested at the beginning. Actually, what we have to remember that European countries are not US, and what's happened in US sometimes are at bigger scale with a market with a very specific radio on-air market, which is not exactly transferable, in the European context. So the value of our show are important. We had offers, for example, for having Les Couilles sur la Table exclusively on some platforms, but it was not enough, and it was not, fortunately, at the same kind of money, at the same kind of level that we heard about, Joe Rogan show.
It was simply not enough money. I mean, but if it would have been more, you would have considered it, because
it's depend. Everything is you can buy everything. It's a question of money. It's also a question of strategy.
The public broadcaster has something different going on there.
Yeah. But they have other
means.
goals. But for us, we intend to create, a brand, Binge Audio, as a media on a multi-platform ecosystem. So actually, because the distribution today is like that, but it's still based on the RSS ecosystem, which is technically, a dinosaur, and it's going to change very quickly on the next years. And we don't know exactly what's going on.
Really briefly on that, because I thought it was such an interesting observation. I mean, RSS was there for forever. You're completely right. I used to use it all the time. It sort of disappeared from the audience view as the way to read content and put it in. But you say in the podcast space, this is still going on very strong, but that will change now. Will that change because of the Apple decisions, or what is the reason why it will now change?
It's going to change because of everybody's decision. If the platform actually launch a subscription model, it's because they want to kill the RSS and host the content. But on the other side, they propose you other advantages, like you can make subscription model with strong interface, well done, and you can converting really easily to subscription. You can reach other kind of audience you don't have on RSS. So it's a balance of losing a little bit of direct content to the listeners, and on the other side, other way of the tools for marketing. But it's the same the same challenge for on air.
No, but it is ongoing battle between who are the defining platforms for audio content, and will it be everywhere? I know Cheryl, the FT probably also gets approached by these some of these big players saying, okay, come exclusively with us, right? I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah, I mean,
what does the FT decide?
So, I mean, there's no impetus really right now to do anything other than watch it. We did have a podcast behind a paywall last year. I did put it in front of the paywall because, as Joël was talking about, you kind of have your reach, or you kind of try and go for that revenue. The revenue is just, the incentive for the revenue isn't quite there yet. So I put it in front of the paywall just so we can kind of purely reach a different audience than the ones who are already subscribing to our paper, and to grow that audience. But yeah, we do get approached by the various platforms who are trying to get all publishers really on there to kind of diversify sort of their revenues and also have subscriptions. But we're just not quite there yet. And seeing the kind of flop that the Apple launch turned out to be, I think we'll just kind of wait.
Sort of glee across the industry. I mean, but if something from a big company flops, that's good, right? No, but it's just this developing landscape, and I'm so much a European. I would so much hope that in the end there is something else than just the four big players. I'm even rooting for Spotify because it is Swedish from its background. It's just as long as it's not the big players, just like that. But at
Spotify is Swedish, but the chairman is based in San Francisco, no? So
yeah,
most of the power is in San Francisco on all audio platforms. I think it's true. For Norway as a public service broadcaster, it's problematic that we're losing editorial control. Yeah. It's difficult. I mean, both Apple and Spotify have gone in and edited away or...
Oh, really? Oh, I thought just like that they choose what they promote, but what have they edited? Have they really gone into podcast and then changed things?
No, they haven't gone into a podcast, but we have a sex education podcast that was just, you couldn't find it. It was just... and also we have the NRK logo has been edited away on pictures, so we have a problem that people are listening to an NRK podcast and they don't know that they're listening to an NRK podcast, which is a problem for us. And also we had a documentary called the Black Flag, which is about the IS warriors, and they edited away the Arabic on the flag.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
that's terrible.
We're discussing this pretty much in NRK.
Actually, the problem is if we are not enough aware, we could have in a few years the same problem as the European press with Google. So we have to pay attention about that. I'm really interested in what propose, Spotify, Apple in terms of developing the market. But it's okay since you have the choice with a competitive ecosystem with several platforms. Since you have one only platform, which is, Apple is 35 to 40%, Spotify 20%. On two platforms, you have 60% of the market. The rest, is small. You have Google, now YouTube 10%, and other smaller actors. What's going to happen in the next years? We have to pay attention that Spotify and Apple are not going to up to 85%. Otherwise, we could be just submit. We could be weak, and we have the native player and the radio the same problem. To connect together to discuss about those topics at Brussels levels on sometimes.
I think it's a European issue, but I also think that now we're just discussing like who's got the biggest market share and how can we make sure it's not just one company. But what it's missing is that this promise from many years ago that there's also a completely open web where where nobody is just dominating the audience, but where everybody can share anything. And I don't know if we can keep that idea alive. Adam,
we've been in NRK, we're talking about that the hippie era of podcasting is over, and now we have to. It's open, but now it's a problem because now a few people are monetizing on it, and also for. Since we're funded by the Norwegian people, that we're using the Norwegian people's money to make someone in San Francisco even richer is also a problem.
It is problematic. It is.
And also, of course, that what we, you can say in a way that our goal is to make important topics and content popular, they focus on the popular content, so we have in a way not the same goal.
But that I'm sure that in principle is part of any market that develops, but in this particular case you're looking at monopolies that will change the game, and how Europeans respond to it is a really big thing. We have about 15 minutes left, and there's two topics I would like to touch upon. And one is, we want to briefly mention RSS feeds, but what are the technical developments that will still change this market? Is there new tech out there where you feel like, that holds a new promise for this particular industry? Or are there specific new formats? Just looking forward, where do we go from here? We have an idea where we are here. And I know on the tech aspects, and I specifically want to ask Adam about it, because I think as I said in the beginning, right now, the audience size and the revenue coming in from advertising, or basically what is coming in from subscription and so forth, doesn't really match with each other. And partly that's also because it's very hard to target podcast listeners across regions, across markets. Adam, I do think you feel that there are things coming up, more programmatic advertising and so forth, that could amend that or even supplement the revenue stream, right?
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, 100%. There's a disconnect between audience size and ad revenue. So in particular in Anglo-American markets, let me caveat that. So for example, my colleagues in France, they pretty much sell out all their podcast inventory every month because in France there's 4 million listeners. In the UK, there's 17 million listeners. So we have an awful lot of ad impressions there that are going non-monetized, particularly on the kind of long tail publishers, maybe not the stellar big name podcasters. The main reason for that is that the industry, I think, has been in the past very wedded to, and for good reason, but very wedded to a kind of horse read sponsorship style model, which gets great engagement from listeners, but is difficult to scale. You need to speak to an individual host to actually talk through a brand message.
Are listeners really loving that? Because I feel personally offended when I hear a host reading out something and I know they're getting paid for it and I know it's not their preferred brand or whatever. I mean, it feels, I don't know, I hate it.
And it's interesting that the stats don't necessarily back that point though.
Yeah.
When we actually conduct studies on this type of thing, users that hear a host read ad or an ad of any format within a podcast environment are 50% more favorable and open to and receptive of that brand's message. And also podcast listeners as well are in and of themselves more affluent. So a podcast listener will over-index 179% in terms of available money to spend on any given brand's product. So it is absolutely the environment, but the formats and the ability to target individuals at scale is what holds the medium back, I think. That is changing. So for example, in the UK, we moved from, in 2020, the podcast industry, again, small numbers in comparison to the rest of digital, but let's look at them in isolation. We moved from 23 million to 33 million in the UK last year, which was a 43% increase in terms of revenue. And the driver of that was, it's still very much a lot of direct to consumer brands spending on host read advertising. But now we're seeing increasingly more and more kind of traditional blue chip brands with big radio budgets simply take those radio assets and then push them out within the podcast environment programmatically. So the programmatic advertising that we see in video, display, these other formats is now moving over into audio generally, and now increasingly within the podcasting environment. And excitingly as well, and something that we're launching in market, programmatic sponsorships. So it's like that host read feel, but inserted and programmatically served across many, many, many different publishers at the same time. You immediately
so you could put an ad into 25 podcasts and then specifically reach the car owners or something like this, right? I mean,
so you
really
would
diversify.
You would look at it from a category point of view. So instead of targeting, let's say, just the Football Ramble, for example, which is a popular football podcast in the UK, and getting those guys who host that podcast to talk through the product, what you would do is you would pick your favorite host, get them to talk about a specific product, and then you would push that at a category level across all football podcasts or all automotive. But you would use a mixture of contextual targeting, so content, plus also behavioral elements based upon things like postcode data, etc.
Yeah, undoubtedly that's coming, and that's coming everywhere because that's such an interesting market as well. Cheryl, Joel, Cathinka, I mean, I know there's a question actually in the chat by exactly the question, but how those NRK or other public broadcasters handle that platforms like Spotify and Castbox monetize content paid by taxpayers. At the moment, the question is, you don't know, right? I mean, this is not.
No, we know. we're building. We have our own platform, NRK Radio app. So we're focusing on building that platform.
And will you then pull out all your content from the other platforms and just focus it on the NRK app?
Yeah, we're working on in a way in a ladder. So we're starting now in August. We're starting with first in NRK Radio. So first a week before in our own app, and also everything that is more than 1 year old only in NRK Radio, and then we'll kind of see what's happening in the market and how that's. But we've done some tests so that we increased the listening in the app with 50% when we've done the similar publishing strategies before. So we see that is the way to make it work and to see that people use our own platform more. So a kind of a ladder model where we're increasing as we go along.
Yeah. Basically, you use the marketing of the big platforms and then you pull it back in and hope that the audience will follow to your own. Is that the same for the FT, Cheryl? Because that's the same. I mean, even though your business model is very different, the decision is the same. You know, do you work with the big platforms or do you develop your own platform?
No, we definitely work with the big platforms. Our sort of platform partner is Acast, and they help us with marketing, and that's sort of where our the podcast marketplace is as well. But yeah, it's quite a rapidly evolving space. But I mean, for us, I mean, we're really kind of focused on the content and creating really great podcasts to kind of bring out to market. And like I said, grow our US listeners, and then just like showcase the best of our journalism. So we're a little bit agnostic there, but yeah, we work closely with our sort of platform.
So it's actually a clear decision. You say we focus completely on the content and then we just get it out there to as many people as we can. And we're not going to focus on our own FT app that, you know, brings it together and leave the rest, right?
Yeah, and I think the advantages of an app generally is that you sort of get sort of those, the data, basically, you know, you can find out a lot more about bounce rates, a lot more about, you know, the profile of your listener. But for us, we recognize that most people actually access our podcast on these sort of third-party apps. And so, we're sort of less focused on that, I'd say.
And do you see a future with a lot of subscription models in it, or do you think because for now that's not really a big area, right?
It's not really a big area for us. I mean, I think also if you look at a couple of years ago when Luminary, which is a subscriber-based sort of platform, it sort of launched, it was a little bit of a flop because I don't think that the market is quite there yet. And also, you put something out there for free, you put millions of little products out there for free. It takes a while for people kind of develop an appetite to subscribe to something. And for us, it's mainly that sort of reach tool, and that's how we're sort of using it right now. That said, we do make money off of ad sales, and we make a pretty comfortable sort of 7-figures from it. So, you know, it's also a business for us.
That's nice money.
Yeah. So it's
so that's the 7 figures. That's more than £1 million as well, right? It's not yours.
Yeah, and we're a small team as well. So we've doubled our ad revenue since 2018. So we're really growing, but we're growing kind of back on the back of some really great content, and then kind of just finding that audience that are really interested in it. So meeting that audience need, I think.
Yeah, and your model is already there in the sense that you already have the FT with its own subscriptions that supports the, you know, the great investigative journalists that you have and so forth. You don't have to pay them out of the revenue.
Exactly.
Ads.
Yes, there's that kind of difference there.
Yeah. And Joël, in France, how do you see that developing? Are you seeing subscription options or, you know, a separate all French podcasters together app where everybody else goes out, or what's going on in that field?
You mean in terms of business or in terms of habits, listener habits?
I'm interested in both, and we have 7 minutes left. So basically, I'm asking you, what's your lesson for the future for the rest of Europe when they're making this? Because you're doing this so successfully. What is your recommendation? Or what is your vision? Where does it go from here?
Actually, the system goes to a model where the value is made by advertising. Quite advertising only, and for Binge Audio we do sponsorship 100%, so Austrad only, to maintain, you know, high price, but we know that it has another counterpart because it takes time to create, you know, the content and so on. But we do like much more haute couture in that field, and we know that the market is going to the programmatic audio ads and things like that, as we can collect and treat data. So we we follow the market and on the advertising side by trying to have high quality advertising offer. And on the other side, the paying subscription model, we launched on last November a newsletter, audio and mail at the same time, with strong ambition on that part, because 20% of our revenue comes from the listeners in terms of events, books, and now audio. Since the platform
we didn't even discuss that. You have a very diversified model there.
Yeah, and
you basically develop brands, and then you publish on all possible formats as well, right?
Yeah, and we believe on this subscription model, as it is also on video, entertainment, books, and other kind of cultural and media content. So we are going also to follow, that very precisely. The last part, just to be short, is to say that we have a technical challenges in terms of, speech to text, indexation of the content, recognition of the labels, the names and so on, to index the content on Google or other databases.
But that market is exploding as well, right? With machine learning and AI and all kinds of tools that are,
And there is no yet strong technologies, only the beginning, but
but it's coming. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned it. We should have discussed it earlier, but there's a big thing going on apparently, at least to the podcast I listen to, that every podcaster now wants his or her own book. Podcast plus book seems to be a sort of a lovely combination of things. I go to Cathinka and then for Adam to wrap it up. And as said, we have 2 minutes. Cathinka, 2 minutes, future.
I think I think the future will be more like as the streaming platforms on television, that more and more will be exclusive on their own platforms, and I think it will just be growing in terms of genres and content and age groups. So, but I think also radio will live for a very long time also. So just the future of sound is very bright.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I shouldn't add things myself, but when I look here in the Netherlands, the future of podcasts as an intimate medium that follows other really strong media properties, like TV shows that are followed by a podcast where people talk about the TV show. Amazing. It's like when you discovered Twitch for the first time, thinking, I didn't realize people could listen or watch it all the time. Adam, you can wrap us up. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at the future, listen, I'd agree with Cathinka. If a lot of the big headline content will go exclusive behind a paywall, there won't be any real means for third-party technology companies to really get involved with that kind of content. But listen, that leaves millions of other podcasts out there that are not trapped behind a paywall. And the only advice I could give to those types of podcasters is that your inventory and listeners are extremely useful to brands and to advertisers. Categorize your inventory correctly. Send everything that we need as a third-party kind of technology business, and we'll do the rest. As the medium scales, as podcasting scales, and brands continue to get turned on by the medium, we will be able to scale the inventory from an advertising perspective. Just a matter.
You're like the Shopify of podcasts. The outside party that white labels everything else and make sure that people still can get their revenue and run the same model. I personally am hoping that there will also be some cooperation among different European podcast houses, publishers, to bring back those audiences and make them big, so that those audiences are not small audiences but really big audiences. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up here. If you are hanging around, audience out there, apologies, I didn't get too many questions. I didn't ask too many questions. But there's another session this afternoon that I will be running, which is broadcasters, specifically strategies towards podcasting, with more about the content there as well. And of course, there's a whole range of super interesting sessions to follow today. I want to thank our speakers. Thank you very much. I want to thank Adam for also supporting this event. And go listen to some podcasts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.